we tell those who work for Al-Qaeda and Daesh that the time of divided Somalis is now over. You have now an opportunity. Join in the development of Somalia and join with your brothers and sisters. You have done what you have done.
Al-Shabab, the terrorist group's name, means the youth. It was founded by young men and has often recruited young boys to do their fighting. In February, the terrorist organization killed 3 senior government officials in the country's semi-autonomous Puntland region. The blame is on these individuals. 5 of them have been executed and 2, Muhamed Yasin Abdi and Daud, Saied, Sahal, could be put to death at any moment. While rights groups condemn the death penalty overall, their criticism has been more severe in this case because they say the suspects are all minors, as young as 14 years old, and Amnesty International says they were unfairly tried in a military tribunal and tortured to confess. And they quote family members as saying the boys were never part of Al-Shabab in the first place. Let's try and understand what's going on. Joining me from Nairobi is Amnesty International's Patrick Mbugua and Charulata Hogg. She's a researcher at Chatham House who specializes in child soldiers. She joins us from London. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Patrick, so let's aim for some clarity first. Is it absolutely clear how old these boys are and whether they were tortured?
Yes, we talked to the family members and they gave the ages that we put in our urgent action, which we released last week, and they were between 14 and 18. We are aware that the Ministry of Justice in Puntland have contested those figures, but we stick with our ages because we got the figures from the families. We tried to talk to the ministry before we released the statement and they did not respond. So we stick with our ages. They are between 14 and 18, so they are minors.
Yeah, we spoke to others in your field, in the human rights field. They didn't want to come on the record, but they said their information suggested that a few of these were 18 years old. Now, is it still absolutely necessary if somebody is 18 years old to call them a child soldier?
Well, according to international law, anybody below 18 years is a child. But the most important point here is not even the ages of these minors. Amnesty International is concerned with the far more fundamental issues. One, death penalty. Amnesty International, we are opposed to death penalty under all circumstances.
No, I understand that.
Torture. These boys were tortured.
Yeah, we want to look at whether they've had a fair trial and whether they were actually child soldiers as well. That's why, understandably, we know Amnesty's position is abolitionist on death penalty overall. But in terms of this case, I just want to be absolutely certain that there's clarity that they were tortured and that they were, in fact, young teens, because opinions seem to differ on that. I just want to know if it's absolutely clear-cut.
No, the information that we got from the family was very clear that they were arrested in the streets of Bosaso. These were just civilians in the villages, so they were not child soldiers, according to the information that we have.
Okay, Charulata Hogg, I'm looking at some stats. 60% of soldiers captured in Puntland in March 2016 were under 18, those fighting for Al-Shabab. Is that normal? Is that expected?
I think what's becoming quite
Hold on, Patrick. I'm asking Charu that one. Sorry, Patrick. Charu, please, go ahead. Yeah.
What's becoming quite an accepted trend, both within armed groups and among among government forces, is to recruit younger and younger. Al-Shabaab is quite distinct in the fact that it relies on most of its fighting soldiers to be under the age of 18. And your figure is indeed one that has been echoed in the UN Special Representative's reports as well. But it's not just recruitment and use of children that we're talking about. It's a variety of violations that children undergo when they are recruited and used by groups like Al-Shabaab.
Do they have a choice at all, Charulata Hogg?
Absolutely none. In any case, the fact that this international protection exists for children, the fact that children are children under the age of 18, and this is international standards, is because they cannot make decisions for themselves. Children have agency. Children's wishes should be certainly respected and taken into account, but not when it comes to fighting an adult war. That is not their choice, and they should not be allowed to make that choice. To say that child soldiers soldiers are coerced and recruited is a fallacy. It is coercion. That is what it is. They are made child soldiers because of coercion. So they have no choice in the matter at all.
Let me try and jump in there, Charu, and ask, is there a difference? Would you, as you try to understand that, draw a distinction between someone who might be 17 and someone who might be 8 years old and carrying a gun?
Well, you've touched on a very sort of sensitive issue when it comes to legal standards, and you referred to this question when you were talking to Patrick about whether they were 18. Well, certainly, are they 18 now? Were they 18 when they were recruited and when they were detained and tortured? The question here is that they are possibly some of them could be 18 now, but the violations that they have suffered, not just at the hands of the state in terms of their arbitrary detention and torture, and forced confessions have been asked to deliver. Not just that, but prior to that, in the violations that they've suffered at the hands of the non-state armed groups. You know, these are victims, I think, and let's not lose sight of that. So yes, certainly there is a discrepancy when it comes to the Puntland legislative framework. So as far as the Puntland authorities are concerned, they can say legitimately, we can arrest these people because our legal age of a definition of a child is 15. So if these individuals are above 15, they're not children. So I think that's a moot point that has been raised by the UN, by various governments, that this discrepancy that exists, that on the one hand, the Somalian government has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It accepts that 18 is the international standard and a definition for children. However, it has not, in its own domestic legislation, legislated on it. So there's a variance that exists. So there is this kind of complex issue that exists in terms of legislation as well. Forget about the moral grounds on which this issue hangs.
Indeed. Patrick, so we have the semi-autonomous Puntland, and, you know, there's a question, who do you hold to account if this is happening within Somali territory and, you know, they're fighting this terrible insurgency of Shabab who do unspeakable things. There are also reports of the Somali army having recruited hundreds of children over the past 6 years. Be that as it may, when you as Amnesty try to address the situation, when something's going on inside Puntland, who do you talk to, the Somali central government, or do you talk to the Puntland regional government?
In this case, we addressed our concerns to the Puntland government, but as Amnesty, we hold the federal government of Somalia responsible, but we know the relationship between the Puntland administration and the federal government is a form of confederal. Yes, they are part of Somalia, but at the same time, they are semi-autonomous. Therefore, we hold them responsible. At the same time, we communicate with the government of Somalia and we hold them responsible as the federal government.
Charu, and, you know, whether it's by coercion, whether it's people not having many options, it's a terrible situation for many young people there. Now, you've studied how people who are considered child soldiers are rehabilitated, how they are reintegrated. You've seen the common threads throughout multiple countries, and from time to time, we have success stories, whether it's former child soldiers in Liberia or South Sudan or so on. Is there any single magic formula to reintegrate and rehabilitate a child soldier?
I think one of the key issues that we have to bear in mind is acceptance by the family, by acceptance by the community, and normalization. Let's not forget that a lot of these children from very young ages, as you yourself said, 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, are in an environment which is not an environment of normalcy for a child. They do not know a different environment. So how do we actually transpose that environment and substitute it with an environment that does not penalize them for actions that they are not responsible for, but instead substitutes it with compassion, care, recovery, education, support. In many cases, children at the ages of 18, or other individuals, young people at the ages of 18 and above, do want to get back into education. Some don't. I think these are very individual sort of needs which have to be responded to by a state. There are sort of programs which exist. There are mechanisms that exist which are internationally accepted, standards that have been formed formulated over the years. Do they work as a magic wand? Unfortunately not, because I think communities, most of all, can be quite unforgiving, and the level of stigmatization that former child soldiers go through is very, very high.
Patrick Mbugua and Charulata Hogg, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Unfortunately, I've got to move on to another segment, but thanks so much.